Good afternoon. My name is Britt Doolittle, and I'm the Senior Development Editor for Jet Law. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Jonathan Handel, who will be giving his keynote address, Like Scorpions in a Silicone Cage, How Hollywood Management and Labor Fought While Content's Kingdom Was Slipping Away. Mr. Handel practices transactional entertainment and technology law at TroyGould in Los Angeles, California. He has previously worked as a talent lawyer and also as associate counsel of the Writers Guild and as a litigator. He is a member of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences and was named by the Daily Journal as one of the top 100 lawyers in California in 2008. Mr. Handel's name might sound familiar to you, as he has appeared about 400 times in international, national, and local television, radio, print, and online media. He blogs at www.jhandel.com, so if you're interested, please review that website after this presentation. And we look forward to having his article appear in our third issue of this year's volume. So without further ado, Jonathan Handel.
Great, thanks very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you guys and to be at Vanderbilt Law School. I thank you all for coming, and if that thank you is appropriate at the beginning. And I thank Vanderbilt and the Journal of Entertainment and Technology Law for having me. It's been a great process working on the article with these very strenuous editors, and also sort of collecting my thoughts for my talk. Now, Caesar once said, isn't that a great way to begin a talk? Caesar once said that all Gaul is divided into 3 parts. My talk, on the other hand, is divided into 2 parts. I'm going to talk first about the current status of labor in Hollywood, which is a very vexed topic, and really fits, obviously, with the theme of this conference. And then I'm going to talk about the struggle between content and technology, which fits with the journal, of course, and is kind of a preview of the paper that I've got coming out. So it'd be great if you guys read my blog, jhandel.com, and I'm also on the Huffington Post, and read the article. But once you're done here, you don't have to do either. So that's kind of convenience. I am going to try to have, depending on the time, which I guess I've got over there, do a bit of a Q&A after each half of the talk. So sort of collect your thoughts if you'd like. Hollywood labor right now. The Writers Guild struck about a year ago at this point, and that strike was resolved. The Screen Actors Guild, though, has been in what's beginning to look like a permanent, certainly has been an indefinite stalemate. They've been working without a contract for 9 months, while the sister actors union, AFTRA, a smaller union that has jurisdiction over television, whereas SAG has jurisdiction over both screen and television, so there's overlapping jurisdiction there. SAG has been working, as I say, without a contract. The current situation, and that, by the way, that expired June 30th. The current situation is that the management of SAG has changed. It's more moderate, more deal-oriented management, and that doesn't seem to have helped, unfortunately. Just in the last couple of days, Tom Hanks and some other A-listers spoke to the studios, to studio heads, and said, look, it's time to sit down again, to modify the deal that you offered SAG, and make a deal. So there are back-channel talks going on, but whether those talks will be successful is an open question. The unfortunate reality, as you'll see as I go through the sort of timeline of what's happened, and that will be the theme of the first half of the talk, is that there has been one false start after another, and one disappointment in negotiations and in behavior, honestly, after another. Our story starts back in 1984, but don't worry, we're going to sort of buzz through until we get to the last couple of years pretty quickly. But I need to give you that context because you'll see how it plays out, and that is that a deal was done between the studios, and the studios are represented by a multi-employer bargaining unit called the AMPTP, which is what it sounds like. It represents the major studio. It's a multi-employer bargaining unit. It represents the studios and also hundreds of independent producers. although only the studios actually have seats at the table, the 6 majors and a couple of others. The negotiating room, by the way, tends to have about 50 some odd people in it because you've got various representatives from the studios, various people from the union, hangers-on, kind of a peanut gallery, as it were, that sits on the side and watches much of what's going on. They made a deal in '84 on home video, which was in its infancy and, of course, was VHS at the time, now obviously DVD and increasingly Blu-ray. And that deal was very disfavorable to talent. The studio said 2 things. They said, look, we're at the beginning of this industry. We need some accommodation on the deal. And they also said, we're going to use a model from the record companies, which involves a 20% royalty, and then the studios then apply a small percentage to that royalty before moving ahead with paying talent. And by the way, actually, I'd forgotten. I've got obviously something up on the screen, which is going to go away in a minute. It's a New Yorker cartoon, and it's an advisor with a king. The king is looking kind of morose, and the tagline is, "Bottom line, you're still king of about 2/3 of all you survey." And that obviously fits more with the second part of the talk than the first, but I wanted to not forget to show you the cartoon. Let's see if I figure out how to shut this off. Screen is no longer live, but that'll do most of what we need. So you get this deal in '84, and critically, the deal never gets adjusted. So home video becomes a big business, and in fact, although way back when the head of the Motion Picture Association of America said that home video was going to destroy the theatrical business, he actually used a rather offensive metaphor. He testified before Congress and said that home video is to this industry what the Boston Strangler is to a woman home alone. Offensive on, both offensive and wrong, because in fact, home video is what saved the industry. That business is now roughly 2.5 to 3 times as large as theatrical box office. It really is the home video tail that wags the dog. So as that business became stronger, the deal was never adjusted, and talent never got a huge piece of this deal. What this is, in terms of what they do get, is what's called residuals, which are reuse payments. When a movie comes out on DVD, TV show on DVD, a movie comes out on television, in all these kinds of contexts, television show gets rerun, talent gets additional payments called residuals. And there are dozens of residuals formulas in these guild agreements, which, unlike union agreements in various other unions, these agreements are 500, 700 pages each. They're just kind of dreadful. If you make a film that's covered by the Writers Guild, Directors Guild, and SAG, you're talking about probably 2,000 pages worth of agreements you've got to comply with, you being the producer. So there's a great overhang, as it were, imposed on the film and television business that the technology business does not have to deal with. It's a non-unionized industry. And as we'll talk about later, that's one of the differences and one of the strong economic differences between the two industries. Let me see if I can turn this off. Hello. Can we get the screen's not coming back to life, so I don't know how to shut it off.
That might be the wrong person.
Ah, there we go. Chuck, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we get into the 1990s, a period of labor peace. We did have a strike in '88. It was about foreign residuals, not about home video. There's a writer's strike. The 90s is a period of labor peace, as I say. The early 2000s, we did get a strike against the commercial producers by the Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA, negotiating jointly and striking jointly. But tension began to rise in the relations between the unions, particularly SAG and the Writers Guild, which are the more assertive unions. and the AMPTP on the other hand. 2005, both those unions elect newly aggressive leadership, and the Writers Guild leadership begins to put the Guild on a strike footing, meeting with members in small home meetings, creating informational materials, all that kind of thing. SAG, to my knowledge, was less organizing oriented at that time, and that is one of the things that's made things difficult now, because the union is split. SAG is really riven by factionalism, political factionalism, geographic. There's Hollywood versus New York versus the regional branches. Economic divisions. There is no union that I know of, really, after to some extent, that has such a huge ratio in incomes. Austin and I could both be working on a movie. We've both been in the business 15 years. We're both working the whole 8 weeks on the, which is a typical period of principal photography on a film. And yet, he's a star. He's making 15 million, 20 million. I'm a regular sort of player. I'm making 20,000. It's a 1,000-to-1 ratio. Now, we've had a sports panel. We're going to have another sports panel. We're going to have a music panel. Obviously, there are differences in what different players make. Not to that degree, not that ratio. Teachers, unionized teachers. Two teachers with the same experience teaching the same sort of classes at the same school usually make the same amount of money. In fact, the idea of paying one teacher a little more for merit pay, for doing a better job, having better results, whatever it is itself very controversial. And of course, when there is merit pay, there's no 1,000-to-1 ratio. It's 10, 15, I don't know, 20%, whatever it might be, difference in pay. That has made a huge difference. And at the then you've got the middle class struggling, working/struggling actors, and then you've got roughly 3/4 of the union that doesn't make any income from TV theatrical in any given year. Some of them may make some money from commercials, but they're not making money with the upfront payments. They're not making money even with residuals in any given year. And there again, you have huge amounts of bitterness, people who thought they were going to make it big, who never did, people who have less of a problem in many ways voting to go on strike. Because if you're not working, what does a work stoppage mean? That's a big problem. The SAG board, also the board of directors, is 71 members. That's practically ungovernable. And as we'll see as we get to SAG in the timeline here, that's created some real problems. IBM or some big company like that has a similar number of employees as SAG has members, and SAG has 126,000 members. They don't have 71 member boards. They've got 13, 11, 15, I don't know, something like that. Much easier, if you've got to think about the psychology of some of this and the human relations, because you go to law school, and part of what happens is that your intuitive knowledge of people gets drained away from you. By the way, law schools typically are. And of course, if you went straight through from college to law school, you haven't worked in the outside world, particularly other than summer jobs, so you haven't even developed some of this intuition. How does politics work in an organization? What is the combination between politics and performance and merit, all that kind of thing? So it really becomes important to understand the strategic and interpersonal aspects of this. And as you'll see, when I started blogging about this stuff, which was right in the run-up to the writers' strike, that's when I started blogging. It's when I started talking to the media. My conversations then were much more related to analysis of the merits. What are the deal proposals from each side? What does this mean? How do residuals work? These kinds of things. And the Writers Guild is much less factionalized than SAG. It's also much smaller, about 1/10 the size. And so people tend to know each other more. The boards also are much smaller. When I got to SAG, I started that sort of analysis at the beginning, but quickly became aware of the politics and how that was driving things, and then quickly became enmeshed in the politics. And I've been called everything from, you know, wonderful and brilliant and fan emails and all this wonderful stuff to nauseating, a jerk off, and a studio toady. You know, so it's really been a situation where, you know, and you have these blog comments, okay, on SAG Watch, which is a great blog, where you've got endless series of comments. They do an article, you end up with 41, 51, you know, 70 comments on a single blog article that quickly become nothing about the blog article and more along the lines of, you know, Jane, you ignorant slut. I mean, and it really gets to that level. And it's, you know, it's a horrible thing. And you look at this and you go, you know, you're all in the same union. Whatever happened to brotherhood, sisterhood, and solidarity? Well, you know, right out the window. So we get to 2007, the Writers Guild negotiations, and the studios propose what is essentially a nuclear option. I mean, it really is though the AMPTP had not bothered to read the trades and realized that the Writers Guild was on a strike footing, or else they intended to provoke a strike. And what the studios, in a minute, what the studios got out of that. Not entirely clear, but they proposed turning residuals into a form of net profits. And if you know anything about the movie business, you know that net profits usually are zero. That's the area of creative studio accounting that, you know, people have heard about. They also proposed on new media a 3-year study. So, gee, we're going to start doing things, you know, Hulu, we're going to start doing this and that. This area is going to advance. And we're going to give you a study rather than much of any money out of this area. Well, you know, and new media, as we'll see, you know, became the sticking point in these negotiations. Well, the writers said, you know, fool us once, home video, fool us twice, the way cable was paid for, fool us 3 times, the way Fox was paid for a while, but not a 4th time. We're not going there. And negotiations failed, and the Writers Guild went out on strike November 5th. TV production shuts down. Movie production doesn't. Now, why not? Has anyone been involved in either TV or film? Anyone have a sense of that? The answer is that movies are shot and written on an almost week-to-week basis, or television programs are. So someone is writing right now the script that on a comedy is going to be shot within the next 2 weeks, or on a drama that's going to be shot within the next 3 weeks or so. Drama scripts are longer, they're 1 hour, more complicated to shoot, so there's more pre-production time. Movies, on the other hand, are written now and take forever, you know, to get made. So the studios had banked movie scripts, but you can't really do that with TV. And they said, well, you know, we've got enough for quite some time. Well, they didn't have enough for quite some time. They had enough for a little bit of time, and then TV production shuts down. So the Writers Guild strike was really, in many ways, a TV strike. And the impressive thing is that even though there are economic differences there, the showrunner, the person that runs the show versus the staff writers, the Writers Guild did hold solidarity, did hold together until starting to fade at about the time that the strike was resolved, which is one of the reasons it was resolved. The Screen Actors Guild stalemate has been much more of a movie stalemate because, you know, if you don't have actors, you can't shoot, but there hasn't been a strike. So if you're shooting television programming, if there suddenly is a strike, you got to shut down, well, at least you have half the season in the can. At least for non-serialized. For serialized, like 24, it's, you know, going to be more of a problem. But movies, the cost to shut down, you know, a $50 million, $100 million movie is a lot greater. And so studio theatrical production accelerated before the expiration of the SAG contract, which was in June, you know, as I say, it was June 30th of last year. But since then, some people were trying to beat the deadline. Since then, studio theatrical production has ground pretty much to a halt. And one of the questions is whether it's going to resume shortly, even if SAG doesn't do a deal, because they need product for 2010. And the product that they've banked, the movies that they've banked, are sort of coming to an end. And it's not quite clear exactly when that's going to happen and what's going to happen. There are complications in the way movies are financed that has made it hard to secure a particular form of insurance. That affects some studio movies, probably not all of them. So there's a lot of complicated, a lot of moving parts. There are rallies for the Writers Guild, a lot of sort of picket lines, that kind of thing. An attempt at federal mediation that fails, and the writers, among other things, had also, in addition to new media and keeping residual structure pretty much the same, had also been demanding that the home video problem be resolved, that the residuals for DVD be increased by 50% or 100%, doubled in other words. That demand was abandoned fairly early. Without significant leverage, without a joint strike threat between the writers and Screen Actors Guild, there will never be an increase in that formula. Studios will never do it. And of course, as the economy has cratered and studios have been under more and more financial pressure, they've continued to say, look, we need all the income we can get from home video to even survive in this business. So it's made them even more recalcitrant. It's just not going to happen. What happens next? After about 8 weeks or so, the studios invoke something called force majeure, which is a clause in individual contracts for writers with significant status who have development deals. They're being paid a lot of money to sit around, come up with ideas, and if they come up with a good idea, the studio then pays them more to write a script and more to shoot a pilot and more if it goes to series. So they get paid to sit around on an exclusive basis and be clever thinkers and have a small staff and that kind of thing. And those deals, now first of all, the individual deals with writers or with screen actors can have terms in them that are above the union agreement, but not below. So the union agreement sets minimums on pay, on working conditions, on what kind of participation in profits, in other words, residuals, people get. And these individual contracts, in the case of these development deals, have a clause that says if an event of force majeure lasts 6, 8, 10 weeks, it's negotiated, we can terminate the contract. Now, what is force majeure? Major force. It's whatever there is, you can think of it as, quote, act of God, whatever happens that shuts down production that's beyond the control of either party. So, for example, when we had the Rodney King riots in LA, and we were under curfew for, I don't know, 10, 12 days. I mean, it's like being sent to your room without dinner. You couldn't be home, you couldn't be out after dark. That was an event of force majeure. Businesses were shut down for at least that part of time, at least a portion of that time. We had army troops, regular army troops in the streets. I mean, it was just bizarre. A strike by a union is an event of force majeure. So when the Writers Guild went on strike, a force majeure event was declared. 8 weeks later, the studios were able to terminate a lot of these deals. They terminated the deals with writers that had not been generating good ideas or many ideas for series. In other words, they cleared out the deadwood. So the studios got something, in their view, that was good out of this strike. They got to clear away deadwood. The Directors Guild, their deal was set to expire June 30th of 08 also, but the Directors Guild never strikes. They struck once in their 71, 72-year history. That was for 5 minutes on the West Coast, 3 hours and 5 minutes on the East Coast. There's a time difference. So they negotiate their deals early, and they got a deal done in January. This was the other thing. The studios wanted to negotiate with a more compliant union, which the Directors Guild is, and a more deal-oriented union, which they are. A union that had spent 2 years and $2 million studying new media, hiring consulting firms, and a new media template was established. Now, significant portions of the residual structure among the really the four unions, including AFTRA, SAG, directors and writers, mirror each other. It's called pattern bargaining. In some industries, pattern bargaining involves different employers doing the same deal with a single union. Auto industry, I believe, works that way. In the entertainment industry, it's flipped. It's different unions doing a similar deal with the same group of employers. The Directors Guild set a pattern that the studios were then going to impose on the other unions. It was a good deal, but not a great deal. It gave the directors and ultimately the other unions a foothold in new media, but there were many provisions that were not so strong. Now let's just take a look. We can't go through all these provisions. This is 50, 60 pages worth of contract language. But let's look at the three different kinds of new media. There is so-called move-over new media, which is when an existing television program, or in some cases movie, is made available on iTunes, Hulu, ABC.com, whatever it is, perhaps increasingly, in other words, any new media platform. So that's existing programs moved over to new media. Secondly, there is so-called derivative new media, which is when little web series or mobisode series are created based on an existing program. So it's new content, but based on an existing television program generally. Third is original made for new media. New media that is completely original. The Dr. Horrible's piece, for example, Lonely Girl 13 would be an example. Whatever it is, not based on existing programming at all. Now SAG, even at that early point, critiqued the deal, was briefly public about their critique, and among other things, didn't like the provisions in original made for new media, which are very non-union provisions. Essentially no residuals, very little, if any, union jurisdiction at all. So this would be a union agreement with a big carve-out to it. SAG was not happy with that. The Writers Guild deal gets made in February 2008. Now, why did that get made? The AMPTP had achieved its goals. They'd made a deal with the easier-to-negotiate union, the DGA. They had achieved force majeure, and they wanted to save the Oscars because SAG was aligned with the writers, and A-listers said, we are going to boycott the Oscars if there isn't a deal made with the Writers Guild. And the Oscars, in terms of advertising revenue, are the second most important night of the year after the Super Bowl. So that gave the studios incentive to make a deal. They'd gotten what they wanted, and they wanted to avoid what they didn't want. The Writers Guild, on the other hand, knew that they would have no leverage past the Oscars, at least until the SAG deal expired 4 or 5 months later, if they would be able to hold out that long, the writers, and then threaten a joint strike. So their high point of leverage was going to disappear. So both sides had drivers to do a deal. And the writers also were starting to suffer strike fatigue, and there was the danger that the showrunners, as I talked about, would abandon the strike. The showrunners in '88 were the people who drove a resolution of the strike. That was I think a 6-month, 5-month strike. This one turned out to be a 100-day strike. What the Writers Guild got was the DGA template with a couple of improvements, a minor improvement, and then an improvement that was writer-specific, so it didn't create a template. March, the AMPTP requests that SAG begin early negotiations. The SAG leadership says no. They felt that if they waited until the contract was on the verge of expiring, that they'd have more leverage. Fatal mistake, because SAG and AFTRA, for the last 27 years, had been negotiating jointly with the studios under something called Phase 1, because it was supposed to be the first phase of a merger between the two unions. Phase 1, obviously, didn't gain any traction really in 27 years, and there were a couple of actual attempts to merge. There were votes. They failed in one case by just a small percentage. So you have two unions. Well, what's management's approach to that going to be? Play them off against the other, just as they did with the directors and the writers. That's what happened. Now, let's just talk briefly. This is where you get into factionalism. A group called Membership First the hardliners within SAG controlled the union. SAG has a very complicated governance structure. The national board, individual regional boards, a paid executive director, an unpaid, who was Doug Allen, by the way, from the NFL Players Association most recently, an elected president, an executive committee that does I don't know what, if much of anything, and committees, including the negotiating committee. And as we'll see, when there was a regime change, an election at SAG that changed the composition of the national board, none of these other offices changed. So you ended up with a very divided Screen Actors Guild. So the leaders of this membership first were referred to as the two Allens. Alan Rosenberg, who was a big actor in the past on LA Law, emphasis on the past, and Doug Allen. What you get in March, SAG had started an active conflict in late 2007 with AFTRA and had attempted to deleverage AFTRA, to reduce its power in the joint structure, which was a 50-50 power. SAG hardliners didn't like the fact that AFTRA, like the Directors Guild, is oriented towards making a deal, not towards striking. And they felt that we need to take a hardline approach with the studios. AFTRA isn't going to do it. They'll outvote us or stall us, stalemate us in the negotiating room. Let's see if we can screw them. I mean, that was really the approach, quite frankly. And in March, SAG had pushed too far, and in March, by March, they had pushed AFTRA virtually out the door, and in March, AFTRA completed the process and abandoned phase one. Now that set up the opportunity for the studios to play them off against each other. AFTRA first did a daytime deal where they don't overlap with SAG. So they daytime and certain other programming. So they represent soap opera actors and a variety of others outside of prime time, which is where the overlap is. They do a daytime deal. They adopt the DGA new media template in large part. In April, SAG begins negotiations just before AFTRA, but they're played off against the other. The studios say to SAG, you get 2 weeks, 3 weeks in the negotiating room, then you're out and we bring AFTRA in. And when they brought AFTRA in, they said, you guys get 2 weeks, and then you're out, and we bring SAG in. AFTRA made a deal for prime time. So the first time desynchronizing their deal or removing their deal from the same structure as SAG. They made their deal at 4 in the morning, I think, 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and they scarcely had time to vacuum the floors. In fact, I think they didn't before SAG was brought in the next morning. And, effectively, I thought that they would find the AFTRA deal on the table with a Post-it note saying, sign here. As it turned out, they didn't even have something quite as good as the AFTRA deal. The Post-it note said, you guys got to struggle to even get what AFTRA got. What happens there is, next, is the AFTRA deal goes out for ratification by the members. What does SAG do? In a show of inter-union solidarity, SAG attempts to defeat the AFTRA deal. They campaign actively against it. Now, there are overlapping memberships. AFTRA has 70,000 members, of whom, I don't know, 50,000-ish, 60,000-ish are actors, and the others are newscasters. 44,000 of those members are dual card holders. They've also got SAG cards. There is, by the way, a third actors union called Actors Equity. That union covers stage performers. So the SAG deal, SAG contract expires without a deal June 30th. The AFTRA deal passes. Studio theatrical production, as I said, shuts down. July, the SAG election cycle begins for the board. That means no deal is going to get made between July and September when the polls close. Everyone is focused on positioning themselves. An insurgent slate runs in Hollywood called Unite for Strength. Also in July, AFTRA ratifies its deal, as I said. In October, SAG moves towards a strike. Mediation begins. The moderates have won a majority now, not on the Hollywood board, but when coupled with New York and the regions. But that's a fragile coalition at first, and they begin, those three groups begin an attempt to get on the same page. So again, unlike what I'd predicted, they don't fire Doug Allen as their first action. In November, a deal gets done with the IA, the IATSE, which is a union that represents crew members. Again, the new media template. SAG now is at the caboose. They're at the end of the negotiating cycle, and they've got very little leverage. AFTRA's done a deal, the IA's done a deal, everyone's done a deal with this new media provision. In January, the moderates finally attempt to fire Doug Allen. The hardliners control, as I say, the presidency, which means they control the chair of the meeting. The hardliners filibustered for 28 hours. It was a 28-hour meeting. It was an astonishing experience. And I ended up writing a blog piece that was sort of investigative journalism, where I talked to a number of board members from across the country and detailed what went on inside that room. Rosenberg at one point said to the assembled folks, "You fire Doug Allen, you'll get an effing civil war in this union. You want an effing civil war, you'll get it, and I'll lead it." So that's the sort of lack of solidarity and lack of unity within the union. People had 3 minutes to speak. Rosenberg would say when his people were speaking, "Oh, the time clock is broken, don't know how to fix it." Somehow the time clock would start working again when the moderates spoke. And on and on it went. He almost had someone thrown out by the security guard. This muscular guy is coming over to one of the moderates. People were voting for each other in the hardline faction, again, a violation of rules. It was amazing. Finally, using a written consent kind of document, after the meeting, a couple weeks later, the moderates get Doug Allen fired. They install the former general counsel of SAG, who was very deal-oriented, great guy named David White. What happens is in February, well, first of all, two things. One is that Rosenberg then sues his own union. So it just gets more and more crazy. And journalists who I work with and talk to who are on this beat, would talk to me and they'd say, "Who do I have to, F to get out of this story?" It just was excruciating. It was like nails being pulled across a blackboard for months on end. And every time you thought the thing might end, they were just pulling you back again. And the studios make an offer. They get SAG and the studios get back in the room. The studios make an offer that SAG knew, in terms of many provisions, it would have to accept. The new media template, abandoning DVD, various other things. But the studios say to SAG, "We do 3-year deals," which is true. They always do. "So we want this contract to expire 3 years from the date of ratification, not 3 years from the date that the old contract expired." Now, why is that a problem? Technicality? No. Because if the contract expired 3 years from the old contract, SAG and the Writers Guild would be synchronized, because the Writers Guild deal was set to expire in 2012, within several months, 2 months of when the SAG deal would expire, 2011 rather. But the studio said, "No, you're going to get a 3-year deal and it'll expire 2012. Well, even the moderates went back to the board, to their SAG boardroom and said, "We're not voting for this. We can't accept this." And the hardliners, of course, said that for that reason, and also because they weren't getting what they wanted on new media, and they had real problems with the new media template, as I said. So the studios had an opportunity to shut this thing down by making an offer that would have synchronized the expiration dates, or brought them close at least, which would have given leverage in 2011, which would have allowed the unions to improve the new media deal template at a time when new media, particularly original made for, would have become more important and economically significant. In March, which is this month, the commercials negotiations began between SAG and the commercial producers. Those had been on hold. SAG has 7 expired contracts or about to expire. That's part of the legacy of the hardliners, unfortunately. And so now they're dealing with their two most important contracts simultaneously. Pilot season, when pilots are produced for next year's television programs, usually AFTRA would get 5 to 10% of the pilots, SAG would get the rest of them. This year, thanks to the SAG problem, the SAG stalemate, and also thanks to the development of 24p, of digital production for television programs, which is much similar to what AFTRA had in the past. They had videotape and SAG had filmed television shows. For those two reasons, 94% AFTRA. The SAG hardliners who hate AFTRA and who tried to kill the AFTRA deal have poured sugar in their own gas tank and have managed to become basically the best thing that's happened to AFTRA in quite some time. When will there be a SAG deal? You know, I don't know. The stars, as I said, have tried to align the two parties. Perhaps we'll end up with a compromise expiration date somewhere between 2011 and 2012, you know, 2.5-year deal. We don't know. The future, what does the future hold? More labor unrest. Because Silicon Valley is not going to take an Ambien and stop innovating. So the stuff that we call new media today, the issues we've had today, we're going to have new ones in 2 or 3 years. Hulu has advanced. Facebook has advanced. You'll start to see probably, you know, media on Facebook. You'll see more on cell phones in this country like they've got in Asia. You'll see more devices that are hybrids. You'll see more types of set-top boxes that bring confusion as to what's video on demand, what's new media, what's, you know, who knows what. I think we're going to see labor unrest for the foreseeable future. And it's a problem because it really has injured the industry. It'll be a growth area for me. I think I'll probably be blogging and in the media for quite some time, but it's not great for Hollywood. Let me take some questions at this point, because this is the, if there are any, because we're sort of at the partway point, the halfway point. Yeah. Well, part of it's been, you know, the ability to be neither a studio toady nor a union, you know, hardliner, certainly apologist. I don't practice entertainment labor law specifically, although, you know, many of my clients are affected by this. And so I've been able to, you know, to the extent possible, to take a more independent, you know, view of this. I think that, you know, on the issue of expiration date, that the hardliners really fiddled while the calendar burned. And this was foreseeable. If there isn't a deal made soon, SAG right now doesn't have increases in the minimums that AFTRA does. These minimums increase 3.5%, 3% a year. So SAG is making, actors are making less than they make on AFTRA shows. If this stalemate continues, AFTRA's next salary bump will come along, and AFTRA will be making 6.5% more than SAG. And that's going to become, you know, the next issue. So to some extent, I just kind of, you know, try to look ahead at this and bring the different aspects to bear. Any other questions? Okay, let me go into a discussion of, you know, more about new media specifically and about the struggle between these two industries, between the entertainment industry and the tech industry. And we've got, I guess, around 20 minutes or so, which should be pretty good. Is content still king? There's that expression, content is king. You know, as I've said, I don't entirely think so. I think content's kingdom is slipping away. Why is that? First of all, content is stumbling, and this began before the recession, although it's gotten worse. Technology, on the other hand, is ascendant. Now, there are contrary trends or bits and pieces of trends always to this. On the one hand, January box office is the best it's ever been, although I think it's a 5-week month, so that certainly helps. And you don't know if, I mean, 1 month does not make a trend, in fact. The other thing is that obviously there have been technology layoffs. They started later than the content layoffs, and venture capital funding has essentially disappeared, as has a lot of angel funding for tech startups. So the technology industry is not gliding along the way bankruptcy lawyers are. But I think content's picture is bleaker. And the distractions of labor strife make it harder for Hollywood to respond. Domestic box office has only gone up 1% per year in the last 7 years. Admissions, the number of people attending movies as opposed to the total cash take, is down about 2% a year. DVD peaked in 2004. It's been declining 4 to 6% a year in the last few years. Network TV is down. Scripted programming is declining, which is a problem for writers and actors. What you're seeing is reality shows, game shows, news programs, and now Jay Leno. That's 5 hours a week of scripted programming that disappeared. Several thousand jobs gone. Jay gets paid a lot of money, of course, but he doesn't get paid as much as it costs to make 5 separate scripted programming shows. His show is also more impervious to strike threats. He's not SAG. He's AFTRA, I believe AFTRA covered, not actor, but host. There are some Writers Guild writers that write his monologue, but the interview aspect, of course, is not scripted. And on the other hand, and in addition, of course, for NBC, by putting Jay in primetime, they kept him away from their competitors. So it really was a 2-fer or a 3-fer or something for the network. On the other hand, scripted programming in cable is up. Mad Men, Dexter, Weeds, Breaking Bad, some of my favorite shows. Why is that? The cost structure in cable is lower. The cost structure is lower. The upfront salaries, both for union workers and for producers and so forth, are lower. The residual structure is generally lower. It makes that business more economical. So, cable used to be the realm of all documentary type programming, and networks had scripted programming. Now they're exchanging their DNA. Networks are running, if not documentary, they're running non-scripted, and cable is increasingly running scripted. I think we're going to see that continue. Film financing has gotten a lot tougher in the last few years. I mean, just dreadfully tougher. Star salaries, inflated executive compensation, the union rules, complex union rules, and labor strife, all of these things create difficulties for Hollywood that the tech business doesn't face. The writers' strike caused losses of about $2 billion or more. The SAG stalemate, by the way, has not been tallied. This created a big hit on the industry. The music industry, I don't have to tell you guys, is in a shambles. I won't ask for a show of hands on how many people download illegal music, but we know it's large, and that includes people in the entertainment industry. I mean, the mores, the attitudes have just changed completely, and I'll talk about some of the reasons for this. Newspapers, another content industry, not Hollywood, also in a shambles. Newspapers are closing. There are going to be some more closures just in the next few weeks. The LA Times spent 2008 laying people off, laying off reporters, laying off editors, laying off other staff, throwing away sections of the newspaper, canceling sections of the newspaper. Our Metro section is now combined with the main news section. I mean, the paper just keeps shrinking, which makes your morning more efficient, but it's the amazing disappearing newspaper. They ended 2008 by declaring bankruptcy, but then decided to begin 2009 with some more layoffs. And the newsroom is half the size that it was at its peak, thousands. Even the New York Times is struggling. They just sold their building and are leasing it back. There's a new building they built 2 years ago or so, big architect and all that. They're looking to unload the Boston Globe, the share that they've got in the Red Sox, but of course all these prices are depressed now. They just took a big loan from the second richest guy in the world, Carlos Slim of Mexico, on punishing terms, 14% interest rate. I mean, and this is the premier newspaper in the country. Books, magazines, video games, even film critics disappearing, just disappearing. You know, people go to Rotten Tomatoes, they go to blogs. Film critics are being laid off. The adult industry, same problem. Why is content suffering? First reason is supply and demand. Okay, there's so much more supply out there. User-generated content, pirated content, free content from newspapers around the country. You can now read, and around the world, you can read whatever, your hometown newspaper now, even though you're here at Vandy, you couldn't, you know, or your predecessors couldn't do that. So supply has increased dramatically. Demand has not, because demand is a function not only of what your income is, it is also a function of how much leisure time you have, which is practically zero for law students, and not so great for, you know, for lots of people generally. So except for music, where you can multitask and just, you know, read your law books, not pay attention to them, and listen to music, or, you know, work out, whatever it is. But when it comes to audiovisual content, movies and television programs, the more you spend doing one thing, the less time you spend doing another. And so time spent eating, sleeping, being intimate with a friend, with a partner, time spent reading the New York Times online is time that you're not spending watching movies. And of course, the time that you spend watching movies downloaded illegally is time that you're not spent watching paid movies. Second, the decline of tangible media. I mean, people think it's a big hoot to sneak into movie theaters, but no one thinks it's a big hoot to shoplift a VHS or a DVD. So we have an attitude towards intangibles that is a little different than the attitude towards tangible goods. And in fact, although the studios call it stealing to download movies illegally, it's stealing of a different sort, because you're not depriving the owner of a piece of property. They still can sell downloads. Movie theater can still sell seats unless the theater is literally, full to the last drop. So, whereas if you take a DVD off a shelf and walk out with it, if you manage to do that, you are depriving the owner of something. They can't also sell the same DVD. So there is a difference, and that's one of the things that's driven a change in attitudes. Reduced transaction costs. It costs less, to manufacture, quote unquote, something for the internet, to make a download available than it does to manufacture a DVD. So although DVDs are, at this point, are like 35 cents, 50 cents a copy, shrink wrapped and in the box, but still there are shipping costs and all that kind of thing, and profits that have to go to the retailer. So, competition means that the price of things tends to get driven down towards the marginal cost of goods. So as the transaction costs decrease, people will drive prices down, and that creates a sense of less perceived value for the product. The rise of free content, another reason. If some content is free, which a lot of it is, why not all content? And this, again, has sort of changed people's attitudes towards content. Newspapers were never free, the ones they deliver to you. Now they are online, almost all of them except Wall Street Journal. There's a lot of free music, even if it's not usually bands that have been signed. There's a lot of stuff that people can get into and listen to. Videos on YouTube, obviously free. Hollywood used to control the audiovisual business completely. It was movies and television, and wedding videos. That was about the only exception. Now people can go to YouTube, and Hollywood never built that business. It's competition. Is it as good as movies and television programs? Often not. But user-generated content, like any good, does not have to be as good to constitute competition. We had some great pizza here, but Pizza Hut, which is not so good, is nonetheless competition for that pizza company. Now, people are going to make decisions when they have a choice. If they have the somewhat more money, often they'll make the choice to go with the they had there. But nonetheless, that's competition, as is user-generated content, pirated content, free content is all competition for paid content. Market forces in the technology industry. Tech industry is now built on making media more available to people, easier for people to get to. Now, the studios are constrained by deals with channel partners like Walmart. Walmart says, don't make your stuff available on this new media device. You're going to cannibalize our DVD business. So they're somewhat constrained. But the people that create original content, the people that pirate content, They're not constrained. And so with each technological development, they're able to distribute their content more effectively to more people, which creates market forces that further drive down the market share for paid professional content. Finally, as I've alluded to, is the culture of piracy, which all of these factors has Now, there is some dispute about whether piracy indeed contributes to the decline of professional content, because not everyone who pays $0 for something would have paid $1, $5, whatever. But there certainly is some effect, because you can't convince me that the demand curve is huge. The demand is huge at a price point of 0, and then is down to 0 when there's paid content. It doesn't drop like that. So it drops steeply, less steeply, whatever, to the extent one can do studies, which is tough. But there certainly is some loss to the paid content companies as a result of piracy. So you get this migration away from paid media. And what's happening is that even paid media on the internet is available for less than it is in physical form. And as Jeff Zucker of NBC Universal sort of lamented, what this means is that the companies are trading analog dollars for digital pennies. And that's a problem, because there are fixed costs to these businesses, high overhead to studios. I talked about some of those factors. High overhead to newsrooms, cost of ink, newsprint, distribution, the number of people on staff, all those things that are crushing when the income side of these businesses declines as dramatically as it has. Now, the diversity of user-generated content, of course, is not all bad. I wouldn't be able to be creating content. Our previous moderator who blogged extensively in music wouldn't be able to get his content out there either. We have the First Amendment. A diversity of viewpoints is a good thing. But nonetheless, you've got this dilemma that professional content is being, great extent, being driven out. This content drives out, even paid content actually online, drives out brick and mortar businesses, which is not entirely a good thing. Bookstores where people have a passion for books and expertise about books, gone. Replaced by Amazon's, other people who looked at this page also bought, looked at these pages and bought such and such. Is that equivalent? Well, it really isn't. Music stores, Virgin in New York and Times Square and in LA is closing the remainder of its stores, Tower Records, on and on. Let's talk about technology, contrast technology. Moore's Law, the doubling of the density of chips every 18 months to 24 months has held true for 40 some odd years. That's how you get things that are smaller, faster, better, et cetera. Hard disk densities, now who cares about that? Sounds too geeky. Well, if you've got an iPod, you care about that because you got a little hard disk that can store a lot of music. If you use the internet, you care about that because there are affordable servers with hard disks in them that can do a lot of stuff. If you've got a PC or a laptop, you care about that. How much have hard disk densities increased? 500 million times in the last 50 years. Now, is there anything that's 500 million times more compact, 500 million times more efficient, 500 million times better in the last, 5,000 years? I don't think so. And this is so different from Hollywood, where production costs increase. Movies now cost over $100 million on average, studio movies, to produce and market. They used to cost a lot less. So, these two industries now are yoked together and yet grow and trend in very different ways. That's a big problem. So what has Hollywood's reaction been to technology? As I suggested in talking about home video, it's usually been fear. It's usually been resistance. And this has been true starting with the invention of sound fit pictures. The heads of those early studios said, who would want to listen to an actor talk? Color movies. Why would you want to watch a color movie? Black and white. It's beautiful. It plays with light. On and on. Television. Television is going to be the death of us. People watch that rather than watching movies. Well, license fees for movies on television now are reasonably good. The pace of change, though, has quickened dramatically, as I suggest, in this industry. The response has been lawsuits. The music industry is probably the only industry that sued its own customer base. I certainly, en masse, I can't think of another industry that does that. The auto industry doesn't sue drivers. Coca-Cola doesn't sue, the people who drink it. It was a crazy response. The television and movie industry of the Viacom versus YouTube lawsuit. You have legislation like the DMCA anti-circumvention provisions, which if you've taken copyright, you'll realize that this says that you can't break copy protection. That's now a separate federal offense, even if all you're going to do is then make fair use of what's on that DVD or other medium. So the scope of copyright has been increased. The term of copyright, another 20 years. This was lobbied for by Disney to keep Mickey Mouse under copyright. So all of these things are this reaction to the degree to which the internet and other technological developments have increased people's ability to do things. Why these negative reactions? Anger at the changes, on the part of the studios, at the changes in social mores. Fear of self-cannibalization. In other words, the lower income from technology stuff. The channel partner reactions, as I mentioned, Walmart. A lack of interest in business models that produce much lower amounts of money. Agents get 10%. Well, 10% of something that is much smaller is a lot smaller amount of money. The studios and their overhead. Personal risk aversion. You're a studio exec and you say, let's try this new technology thing. If it fails, whose head is on the chopping block? And finally, reluctance on the part of executives to make themselves obsolete. You're an exec who understands how DVDs are made, how they're sold. You've got personal relationships with the Walmarts and the Blockbusters of the world. Then this new media, some younger guy gets hired by your studio and he says, let's try new media. I know some people at YouTube, or wherever. Well, again, who do you think is, becomes obsolete and, is threatened by that? It's the more senior person. There is some more productive reaction taking place in the last couple of years. Hulu is a good example. MySpace was bought by Fox. There's a trend towards removal of DRM, and the music industry has largely done that, copy protection. And blanket licenses, for example, Google with the Book Publishers, Book Authors Association, rather than continuing to fight copyright. In music, the rise of 360 deals, so that the labels are trying to get a piece of touring and merchandise income, but the labels are obviously still in a very tough position. Is content doomed? That's the question. No, I don't think it is, because there's nothing to distribute without content. But the economics will change, and it's going to be less lucrative than it's been in the past. There are going to be fewer people, making tons of money in Hollywood, for example. Fundamentally, content creation is an industrial process. You want to shoot 50 movies. It's going to cost you maybe not 50 times as much shooting one movie. Well, maybe actually, it will. On the other hand, you want to distribute, 1,000 streams. It's not going to cost you 1,000 times as much as distributing 1,000 streams. It costs you somewhat more. There's an increase in bandwidth costs, but it's not, at that level. So that's a post-industrial process. They scale in different ways. Newspapers, people are talking about trying to make newspapers into nonprofits, for example. Can they survive in that way? Who knows? There really is a question here of whether, if content was king, whether all the king's horses and all the king's men and women can put content back together again. And I think they will, but it's going to be a different form. It's going to take innovation, and the challenge, particularly to people entering the workforce, particularly people who are interested in IP and technology and entertainment, is going to be to think innovatively and to try to argue within your law firms, within the companies that you move to, against an instinctive reaction to circle the wagons and try to fight the new trends, because they are so broad that it's the law and the business models that are going to change, not the way people access content. Thank you. if there are any questions, we have a little bit of time. Yeah. Sure. I think that it's going to be easier for individuals, as you say, to shoot movies and to increasingly compete with paid content in terms of quality. You know, just as printing used to be the tool of commercial printers and people who owned a printing press, you know, now anyone can use Microsoft Word and print things. Anyone can create online versions of print, in other words, websites and stuff like that. But in terms of smaller Hollywood companies, it becomes hard to finance movies because movies are financed, smaller movies in particular, are financed by pre-selling the foreign rights. So they sell to foreign companies the right to distribute the movie in their own territory. They then use the contracts that guarantee certain sales amounts to get bank loans. But minimum guarantees from foreign buyers have dropped dramatically. And among the reasons, you know, are both the economy, of course, but increased competition from the internet because fewer people are watching paid content in those territories. So that makes it hard. And there are these, you know, there's this union overhang, for example, and even individuals trying to use SAG actors, for instance, they'll give you an 8-page agreement to sign, but one line of that agreement says that the terms of the SAG collective bargaining agreement are incorporated into this agreement. Bother to look at that, it's 700 pages, you know, including a lot of complicated stuff and pitfalls for the unwary. So, you know, I don't think that small studios, small production companies are going to have it easy. And even the studios have been, until the last few years, have been financing up to half their slates with hedge fund deals. So they're losing half of the potential upside in many cases. Now that money is dried up. No one really knows where the next tranche of money is going to come from. There's a history in Hollywood of outside money coming to Hollywood, losing money and leaving sadder but wiser. And the hedge fund folks are in that, right now are in that area, and of course, just because of the economy, less money to invest. Yeah. Well, they're downloading stuff from the internet, but CPMs, cost per thousand, in other words, advertising rates are much lower online than they are in physical media, which means that the revenue is not going to be there to support current ways of doing business. I think you're going to see companies shrinking. The economy, in terms of physical newspapers, is driving out advertising because largest advertisers were car companies, banks, department stores. You know, all these areas, people are cutting ad budgets dramatically. You know, newspapers are going out of business for that reason, because of content on the internet. You know, lots of people read newspapers on the internet; they don't pay for them, and also because even earlier of Monster.com and Craigslist, both of which worked together and eBay to destroy the classified ad business, which was always a huge cash cow for newspapers. So I don't see an easy solution even from ad-supported. One last question, if any? Oh, yeah.
try to?
Well, if I knew that in detail, I'd be making a mint. I think that's the case. I mean, I do think that consumer behavior is going to have to change. There are going to need to be micropayment mechanisms, perhaps tied to ISP subscriptions, perhaps even tied to PC purchases, things like that. There's got to be a more pain-free way of generating royalty income. I do think that newspapers, may go increasingly nonprofit, and I think that Hollywood is likely to change dramatically. I think that some of these changes, for example, to non-scripted in networks, are one-way changes, and these are lower production costs, as I said, productions. So I think we're going to see some great differences. Thanks very much.